So this is something that's probably happened to most of you. You have a power supply, and for some reason or another, there is a break from the power supply to the end that you plug into your device. So instead of just tossing your power supply in the garbage, you could perform a splice using a soldering iron, wire strippers, and so on. And I'll show you how to do that. So here are the tools that you would need to perform a splice. You can use either heat shrink tubing, which you can purchase at Radio Shack. They're rubber-like tubes that once you apply heat to them, they will actually reduce in size. Or you could just use electrical tape. And you will need wire strippers, wire cutters, and of course, soldering iron. Now the first thing you're going to want to do is cut the wires to the same length, which I've already done. So this is the connector side, wires are cut to the same length, and this is the power supply side. Wires are cut to the same length, roughly. The next step is to strip the wires to the appropriate length. On both the connector side and the power supply side. Once you've done that, you want to twist them together so you have a nice orderly bundle of copper. You can do this with your hands or with pliers. Pliers are better because that way you don't get any of the oils off your hands onto the copper. Which keeps the copper clean. But since I'm wearing gloves, it doesn't matter. So before you do anything else, you want to tin the wires, which is twisting the copper like before, and taking your soldering iron and your solder. Way to check to see if your soldering iron is actually at the correct temperature. You just take your soldering iron and a piece of solder, and if it melts, it's at the right temperature. So you want to have a little bit of solder on your tip, and then rest the soldering iron on the copper, and then put the solder along the copper, and it will melt to the copper. And you don't have excess copper on the, excess solder on the copper. So that just makes it a mess. And it should be a nice shiny surface if it's done correctly. And I'll just do the other side. once you have tinned all the leads, or the copper wire, you want to put the heat shrink tubing on each wire. Well, 2 of the wires. Doesn't need to be on both sides. And you want to have that as far back as possible, because the heat of the soldering iron will make it shrink. So, match up the wires. So in this case we have, there's a white line on both of these. And you want to get them as flush as possible. So, then you come in with your soldering iron. Holding both wires together. And again, this should be a nice shiny surface. Now, bring that heat shrink tubing over so it covers your solder joint. And take your soldering iron and rest it as close as possible, but don't let it touch the heat shrink tubing. This can take a while. It's best to put the iron underneath the solder joint because, as we all know, heat rises. And that should be okay. And then solder the other 2 together. And again, you want to have a nice shiny surface on your solder joint. So bring the other heat shrink tube over. And again, just take your soldering iron, put it underneath.
there you have it.